Johnnie Hamp, it's a delight to be here in your own studio, surrounded by your life.
Pretty much so, yeah. I suppose.
It beats working for a living.
Yeah, it's a good title for a book, isn't it?
I think it's an excellent title for a book.
Yeah.
This is your life
Yeah.
in this book.
That's a good title for a TV show as well.
Somebody should bring that back. What a life, I have to say, reading it. How did you come to write it, and how did you find writing it, putting your life down on paper?
Yeah.
Was it a happy experience?
Yeah, I loved it. My boss, Sidney Bernstein, and I used to have dinner sometimes up in the penthouse at Granada where I worked. I was head of entertainment. And we used to talk about all these. I came out with a lot of these old stories, and he said, you should write those down. And I said, well, no one would want to read them. So I ignored it. But later on, when I retired, I thought, well, I'd love to have had some recollections of my grandfather, because he was, I think he was in service, and he ran a post office, and I just liked to have known what it was like, what his life was like in service and doing what he did. And so I thought, yeah, I'll start and do it for my granddaughters. And I've got 7 of them, so no boys.
Did you have journals? Were you able to look back, or do you have a phenomenal memory?
That's all memory.
It's all memory, so it's all from memory.
I've got quite a lot of photographs. I never particularly, not like people do now with iPhones, who take a photograph of their dinner and their cat and all that sort of thing. I never consciously wanted to have photographs taken with some of the famous people that I work with. But I somehow came into possession of these over the years, so I did have quite a good collection.
And the programmes themselves, of course.
Yeah, the programmes themselves,
Yeah,
a lot of them still exist, of course, but many don't, unfortunately.
Can I take you back to the start, 9th December 1931? It's a while back. You're a Streatham boy. How would you describe your family at that period?
Well, I was born in Streatham, South London, but we moved, I don't remember Streatham at all, we moved to Carshalton in Surrey, which was on a big council estate. And I was growing up during the 30s, and I suppose I got the showbiz bug from my dad, because he was a semi-pro magician called the Great Hampo.
Playing the music halls? Playing the music halls?
He did a few musicals, but he mainly do kids' shows and that sort of thing, you know. But during the war, once the war started, he went into the National Fire Service, and they had their own, I suppose it was like an ENSA concert party thing, and he would do his magic act with my mum, Bill Hamp and Gladys. And I would be the little boy that came out of the audience, a blonde-haired, blue-eyed little boy.
The plant.
The plant, yeah. And tell him there was no egg in the bag, you know, that sort of thing. So that was my start into show business.
And you took to it?
Yeah, I took to it. I loved the behind the scenes as well. I appeared in sketches. I was only 10, which was great. And then...
But that became the norm. You were born into that.
Yeah,
so, yeah.
I mean, so later on, I did an act of my own. When I was a teenager, I formed this sort of Danny Kaye impression. He was a great thing at the time.
He was indeed.
Big as the Beatles, certainly, you know. And I used to do this act. And my girlfriend at the time, who became my wife, Fee, she entered me for a talent contest with the Brian Mickey Discovery Show. That was a bit like a Huey Green show on Granada Theatres. They used to do this talent show between films, 2 big films, and the Brian Mickey Discoveries of 1949. And I auditioned and I won the talent contest.
This was as Danny Kaye?
I was doing a Danny Kaye act, impression.
What did that involve?
It was an early tribute act, wasn't it, really, when you look back at it? I used to mime to his record, the lobby song from the film Up in Arms. And I won at Sutton, Granada Sutton. And then Brian Mickey, who was gay, and I think he took a fancy to me, to be honest. I was about 17. And he said, well, there's another, I'm running a competition in Leytonstone next week. Would you come? Because we've got plenty of singers and that sort of act. We've got no novelty acts. Would you come along and do it? And I won that too in Leytonstone. And then the next week, he asked me to go to Welling in Kent. So I won the all Kent talent show. So I was on my way.
This would be appearing at what kind of places, what kind of venues?
The big Granada theatres.
Right.
They're all the Granada theatres, you know, the 3,000 seaters, you know.
And the other acts on the bill?
There was a chap that whistled, a souffleur, they called them, in a monastery garden.
Yeah.
There was a girl that tap danced and played the xylophone at the same time, Marjorie Moon. There was Mrs. Shufflewick, who became quite famous, a cult figure actually in the gay world later on as a female impersonator. And we went on tour. The show went on. I gave up my job.
So how old were you at this point?
I'd be 17.
Okay. And was this... looking ahead, did you look ahead? Or well, you were now in the world of entertainment?
Yeah, you don't look ahead.
This was your life?
You don't look ahead when you're 17, do you? I mean, actually, I went to the Wimbledon Technical College to study when I was 14 to study engineering. And after my 2 years there, I got a first-class diploma. But the very thought of being an engineer made my blood run cold. You know? So I thought I want to be in show business. I looked in the evening news and found this ad, messenger boy wanted, Pathy Pictures. So £2.25p, the equivalent of that a week. So I took that, and while I was there, I won these talent contests. Gave up the job and then toured with the variety show.
You mentioned Danny Kaye. This was a world of the pics, the flicks. Were you a regular visitor to the local flea pit, watching the movies of the day? And how did that affect you? How did that become?
I was brought up on movies, particularly musicals, I think. Oh. All the Fred Astaire, Ginger Rogers things during the 30s. And I can remember the first film I ever saw, it's Top Hat. The first one that impressed me, all singing and all dancing, and that remains with me to this day, really, about music. I'm a fan about fantastic musicals, Gene Kelly's and Sid Cerise, and
Was there a feeling, got to get to the US, to Hollywood, or were you content with your lot here in the UK? Was there enough going on here?
Well, at that time, I mean, I toured with the Brian Mickey Discovery Show for, I think, 6 months, and then I had to go in the Air Force, of course. I mean, I was 18.
National service.
Service.
Yeah. How did you take to that? Because I can't even imagine it. I was one of the lucky ones who came along just after it had been abolished, so I didn't have to...
Well, I was earning £12 a week. While I was at Pathy Pictures, I was on, as I say, £2.25 or something like that.
Yeah.
And when I won the talent shows and went on tour, I was getting 12 quid a week, which was ridiculous, you know. And of course, I had to join the Air Force. So I chose the Air Force rather than the Navy or the...
Any reason?
No special reason. I just fancied that uniform, you know. And the colour suited my eyes.
There's a theatrical speaking, yes, right.
And I think it was £7 a day then, you know, for 2 years.
And right. So a big drop in
But
wages.
I can't... You know, obviously I missed the touring and the variety show, performing. I missed that a lot because I'm in the Air Force. But I did do a bit while I was in the Air Force too, because you know, when you went in there, you went on square bashing.
I was going to say, how did you go from the theatrical world to square bashing? That's...
Well, it was before you actually start, you do 2 weeks getting your uniform and all that. And then before you start, you have an interview with one of the officers, because they're going to put you into a career in the Air Force. You know, and I actually went into radar. But this guy said, you know, what did you do in private life? And I said, I was a variety artist. can you entertain at the officers' mess next month? We've got a big party going on. I said, well, I can't because I had Danny Kaye hair then. I said, I can't really, I've got no civvy clothes because you weren't allowed those on the base during swear bashing. And my hair, it wrote me a chit unknown in the Air Force or in the forces, excused haircuts. So then I did quite a few, the officers' mess, the sergeants' mess, and local hospitals where we get, when they had their dances, and we get free meals, for doing the act. So a little bit during the Air Force, yeah.
Somebody who's with you throughout the book, you were lucky enough to meet your soulmate very early on. Can you tell us a little about her? And that's V, of course, your wife.
Yeah, well, V, I was still at school and I met V. I was still at the Wimbledon Tech. I was, 15? She was a year older than me, so I was her toy boy, I suppose. But yes, I was getting off the bus coming home from school and she was standing at her gate and I had to pass by. And she was chatting to a friend and we said hello and then went to evening school and that was it, So we've been married now for, I don't know, 62 years.
Goodness.
We had a card from the Queen 2
Really?
years ago. Oh, yes, very nice of her. Yeah.
Television, how did that come about? Well, first of all, you were working in the theatre, weren't you? You came out of national service and you started working in the theatre. How would you describe your role in
well,
the theatre?
when I left the Air Force, variety was dying anyway.
Was it obviously dying then?
Oh,
It
yeah,
was,
1952. I mean,
Oh, right.
yeah, variety was.
Why was that?
Television,
Why do you think
mainly.
it's television?
BBC were
Okay.
on the air then, weren't they? And and people had started to apply for their franchises for commercial television in '52. I think that's the year Sidney Bernstein applied for the Granada franchise. And I thought, well, I better get a proper job. And I went to these nice people at Granada. There were 60 cinemas that Granada owned. And I suppose half of them probably had very good stages and would do one-night stands and that sort of thing. So I got a job with them at £5 a week for as a trainee manager, cinema manager. With it, and about a year later, when I became 21, I was able to be a fully fledged assistant manager, and I was transferred to the flagship company, the Granada Tooting, which is a big 3,600 seater. And I was a Frank Sinatra fan forever, going way back to the start, his start in the early 40s, and I love Frank Sinatra.
What is it about Frank?
What?
What is it about Frank?
I don't know. I mean, it just.
I don't know.
I suppose he was the equivalent. He was the challenger to Bing Crosby, wasn't he? So he was the new kid on the block, if you like.
Okay.
And of course, a great voice, and still, in my opinion, the best popular singer of the last century. But when I arrived at Tooting to become their assistant manager, Frank Sinatra was due to make an appearance there. Couldn't believe it. And as assistant manager, my job was to look after Mr. Sinatra, make certain he had clean towels in the dressing room and he was happy, he had what drink he wanted and all that sort of thing. And then I found out on the day, the other duty was I had to go up and control the sound for Sinatra, for Frank Sinatra.
Couldn't
believe it, yeah. And
were you conversant in that area of theatre
well, there were
management?
6 knobs.
Six knobs.
Yeah, and
Okay.
none of this. So there were 6 knobs, and he did that. So
Did you have a sound check?
no, not at all. Not
Straight
at
on.
all. Just so a microphone used to come up, one of those ball and biscuit things,
yeah.
up from stage, and then I'd have to turn the knob up and hope it was going to be loud enough, or But
Packed house.
No, that's the funny thing.
Oh.
I mean, I was a Sinatra fan.
Yeah.
And I couldn't believe it. The first house, about 150 people turned up. I mean, at that time he was having a lot of difficulty with his record company, Ava Gardner. He punched some, I think, Australian journalist in the face and was really down. So 150 people turned up, and he's just said, "Oh, come down the front," and said, "What do you want me to sing?" And it was the best concert I've ever seen. Absolutely fabulous. And then years later...
How was the sound?
The sound was perfect. I made certain it was absolutely... It was either... excuse me. It was either up or down. You know, that was it. But I'm sorry, I've got a bit of a cough there. No, there's a sequel to the Frank Sinatra, that particular night, because when they did This Is Your Life on me in the 90s, Michael Aspel said to me, he got me to tell this story, about unbelievable story. Only 150 people turned up, because within a year, of course, he'd made From Here to Eternity and was right at the top again. And I told this story on my This Is Your Life, and Michael Aspel said, yes, he said, well, we've been in touch with Mr. Sinatra, and he holds you entirely responsible for the bad business that night. She said, and that's why it's not going to come on your show. So,
That'll do.
Nice, yeah.
That's great.
They cut it out when they transmitted the show, which, it was a good gag.
It's a very good gag.
It may have been true.
Yeah. From the theatre into television, in a single bound?
No. I was working at Granada Tooting as assistant manager, and then after about a year, at that time we had Frank Sinatra, Johnny Ray, Guy Mitchell, Frankie Lane, Pat Boone, Eddie Fisher, all those people coming there. And about after a couple of years, I got promoted up to the head office as assistant publicity chief to the whole group, 60 cinemas. So I had an office job, really, and I was publicist for all the movies and all the stage shows. And then within another couple of years, I also took on promoting stage shows, actually presenting them, putting them together, and doing the shows. And that was a good period for me, because it was just the two eyes had just opened. There was Cliff Richard, the rockers were coming from America. There was Little Richard, Jerry Lee Lewis, Eddie Cochran, Buddy Holly, and I was able to put shows together around these guys.
Was that music appealing to you? Because was that music appealing to you? Because you're Frank Sinatra fan, you can never tell who. Yeah.
Well, luckily, I like most types of music.
Yeah.
I've got a very Catholic taste in music.
Yeah.
I mean, people would knock Little Richard or Jerry Lee Lewis, but I mean, they do it well.
How did you find them?
If you do it well, it doesn't matter what the music is,
absolutely.
Classical music or whatever, pop songs, hard rock, I love it. If it's done the best of them, yeah.
They had something extra, didn't they? I mean, true X Factor before that term has been spoiled somewhat.
Yes.
How did you find them, the early rockers?
Great. I mean, that period, which ran from about 1956 to early 60s, when I was producing the stage shows, obviously we were bringing in all the rockers and people, pop singers to do one-night stands, but we're also presenting a lot of variety as well. And it was a great grounding for me, because eventually, as I went into television, and I knew everybody. We'd worked together before, so it was a great opportunity for me to bring people like Little Richard and Jerry Lee Lewis back to do specials later on. But I mean, eventually, my boss Sidney Bernstein, he said, "Do you want to be a television producer?" I don't know.
What was your view of TV at that time?
Well, Granada had started transmitting in 1956, and I got involved because there were programs like Chelsea at 9, and there were several variety type programs, and the producer would come to me because I was producing stage shows and putting all around the country, and saying, do you know a good speciality act for this, a good juggler or something like that, and I was able to come into television but not actually producing it. I'd be associated with it. It was like a big family really, Granada at that time. And there was a lot of crossover between the Granada theatres and Granada TV. But eventually Sydney said, would you like to be a television producer? We'd like you to be. And I wasn't that keen, to be honest, because I was really enjoying the theatre bit. I love live shows, stage. And I went to the company secretary, who was a great friend of mine. I said, but what do you think? He said, well, you'll never earn more. I can tell you this. He said, you'll never earn more than £2,000 a year if you stay with Granada Theatres. So that clinched me, really. So, yeah.
So what were the first things you were producing then in TV for Granada?
Well, I came up to Manchester because that was the main. I had a studio in London, but the main big studio was up in Manchester, the studio complex. So I came up to Manchester for about 6 weeks. Had a great time, in digs, theatrical digs, and other people that I knew from Variety were in there. I remember Morecambe and Wise were there, and next to Flora Robson, Dame Flora, from all the theatres. Loved that. So I thought, well, I'm going to enjoy this. And after 6 weeks, Sidney Bernstein rang and said, get down to the studio at Chelsea today. I said, what's up? And he said, well, we've had trouble with the producer of Spot the Tune. That was a quiz show with Marion Ryan. Yeah. And he's walked out. So I had to shoot down to the studio, and we were going live that night. A quiz show live that night. This was my first experience. Of course, it was all well rehearsed. The director, Phil Casson, who was a great mate of mine, later on we became great friends. Did some good shows together. It was all easy going, but I just had the head of entertainment on the phone live to me because we were going out live, saying, you'll have to cut a minute, after this. And the pressure was on, but it was great. I enjoyed it. And of course, then I took over Spot the Tune and produced it for the next, the end of that series and the next one. And that was my start.
There's a real variety feel to that. How did you move into, was it People and Places or Seen at 6:30?
Yeah, well,
when did you collide with that?
I did most of the early television stuff down at Chelsea,
right?
Which was called Studio 10. All of the others were up in Manchester. And I think after Spot the Tune, I devised this programme called Take a Letter, and brought in
Bob Holness.
Bob Holness. He'd not done television before. He was a DJ in South Africa, and had come back home, and he was great. I think that ran for 150 episodes. So
I know I got the board game.
Oh, did you get the board? Yeah,
that's how popular it was.
Really? Yeah. Well, it was popular. I mean, I remember we had because it was going out live. We had a viewers' competition. I forget what it was, but you had to write something on a postcard. We had just under 990,000 postcards the first week. I mean, can you believe that? That is a lot of people writing down and saying, there was a room full of sacks of these things, and all I had to do was undo one, put hand in and put this is the winner. Yeah. But I did that. At that time when I was producing Take a Letter, I was asked, they said, would I like to go up to Manchester on a permanent basis? I like the South, I like London, I like where I lived in Surrey, to start this new programme called Seen at 6:30. There was a local programme was called People and Places at that time, and they said they wanted to have a different type of show, a bit slicker, a bit more with more gravitas and some pop music and all that sort of thing. So there was Michael Parkinson.
It was an amazing list of presenters.
Yeah, I mean Parkinson, Bill Grundy,
Yeah.
Gay Byrne, and it was great. And,
Michael Scott. Michael Scott, wasn't he?
He came in a bit later.
Yeah,
He was a director, and then he came in a bit later. But the main one was Parky and Bill Grundy, I suppose, and Gay Byrne.
Yeah.
And my job on that was to provide the light entertainment, whatever it was. You know, sometimes most nights there was a pop group, but there'd also be some variety acts and that sort of thing. You know, people that were coming on interviews with. The usual thing, interviews with people appearing at the local theatre.
It was the regional news show, wasn't it, really, for the Granada area?
Yeah.
But it was quite different to regional news shows today.
Yes. I don't know. I mean, I used to bring in every night, and I think someone told me I'd done 880 shows.
I've seen at 6:30.
I've seen at 6:30. So there must have. There were at least two items, one group or some, you know, so there must have been 2,000. Everyone did it. And what I insisted on with the pop people was that they came to us first. Because we were on 5 nights a week, I was able to say to the agent or the record company, if Sonny and Cher were coming over, I could say, you know, are they doing Thank You Lucky Stars on Saturday? You know, I said, well, I have them on Friday. You know.
Very good.
So I could always say,
we're promoting.
You'll be the first to see
their
new record.
Very good.
And we had the Beach Boys, you know, Roy Orbison, I don't know, Paul Anka.
Well, it was a very hip series. I mean, I was tuned
Righteous
in
Brothers
regularly.
Sorry?
I was tuned in regularly as a fairly little boy.
Yeah.
Because it was such a hip, cool show. And you were in competition with Tonight, with Cliff Mitchellmore.
That's right,
which was very 1950s.
Yeah.
And you were banged
changed.
on the minute, you know, 1962, 63 and so
Well,
on.
we used to get into the top 10 in the Northwest, which is, you know, it's off-peak time, 6:30, it's not peak time. Purely, everyone thought, because of the pop people that we had on the show. I mean, the Beatles were on the first week.
How did you hear about the Beatles? Because you're in Manchester.
Yeah.
They're all that way down in Liverpool. How did they come into your orbit?
I used to go over to Hamburg quite a lot when I was with the Granada Theatre Group, because I'd be there with Little Richard or Jerry Lee Lewis or Gene Vincent. They all worked at Star Club in Hamburg. And I saw the Beatles in the Star Club in April 1962, I was quite impressed with them. You know,
can you tell me about them at that moment in time? What hit you? Because you've seen a lot of bands, you've seen a lot of.
Yeah.
What is it about the Beatles at that moment in time?
I don't know. They just had something. What can you say? You know, about Frank Sinatra or anyway. You know, what do they have? What Elizabeth Taylor, Richard Burton? You mentioned it. You know. They've got something, Danny Kaye, you know, charisma. And I mean, they were all in black leather at that time, I think, in Hamburg. I remember, they were outstanding. But I didn't have any vehicle for them at the time because I wasn't well before I'd started to do Scene at 6:30. But a group headed, a film unit headed by Leslie Woodhead and Dick Fontaine, they went to the cabin and made that first bit of film, you know, with them singing Some Other Guy. Yeah. They did Some Other Guy in Kansas City. Kansas City has vanished, we don't know where that is. Oh. Yeah, but Some Other Guy existed. But it was never transmitted, of course, because the quality was so bad. And also, it wasn't for people and places, it was for another programme, something like Looking Round the North or something like that, you know, and the other, or Music Round the North or something, and the other half of that programme was, they were like a pop group in Liverpool, and then there was the Racetrick and the brass band, some race, I forget.
Oh yeah.
The Racetrick brass band or something. But apparently they wanted union rates for all the musicians, and a brass band, there's about 30 of them, you know. So anyway, that was never transmitted. Well, it was eventually, but a film.
As a piece of
I
history.
transmitted it,
Yeah.
and it wouldn't have got past the broadcasting standards as those days. Nowadays, of course, you see iPhones and the broadcasting standards sort of don't exist. I mean, if it's, but that would never have got past it. So when the first group I brought in, when I started seeing 6:30, of course, was the Beatles, and they came in between 1963, January 63 to the end of 64. I think they came in about 8 times.
One of those times, on one of those occasions, you do something quite remarkable. You teamed them up with the fifth Beatle, Ken Dodd. An interview that surely has gone down in history.
Oh, it has, yeah.
I watched it just the other day for millionth time, I think, since it was first broadcast. And it is truly astonishing in that it captures both the Beatles and Ken perfectly. And their admiration for each other shines out of the screen, and their talent shines.
Even though Ken didn't remember their names.
Why would he at that point in time? Yeah, there's something charming about that.
That particular occasion, they've been in, I don't know, 3-4 times up till then, and they were getting very, very big. The previous time they came, they were going to do Twist and Shout.
Yeah.
And I was going to shoot them in the car park, which we did with artists sometimes. If the sun was low, we dragged the cameras out. Those great big things that you had in those days. We dragged those out and shoot it there. And we put the drum rostrum there with the drum sons, and then suddenly over the 8-foot walls came these hordes of kids, and we couldn't shoot it. We had to rush them in the studio and do the song there. But the time that you're talking about, when they did the interview with Doddy.
Well, that was just after they'd done the Royal Variety Show, because Ken makes reference.
They were enormous. They were big.
Yeah.
But that's what I'm saying.
Even the media has caught on by this time.
They were then Beatlemania.
Yeah.
So I thought, we're only a local programme. Mind you, we did cover a great area, because in those days, the scene at 6:30 was transmitted. It was right across Yorkshire, and up to the lakes and down to the potteries. It was an enormous, wonderful plug area for a record. And I thought, well, they're going to be too big soon to
after
do
the Royal Variety Show to see at 6:30.
Local programmes.
Yeah.
So I thought, right, I'll get a camera to follow them wherever they go. They arrived, in their other dressing rooms and messing about in the props and everywhere. And they came in to do I Want to Hold Your Hand, I think, wasn't it? So we did that. And I said, why did we turn the record over and do this boy as well? Yeah, fine, let's do this boy. And so we've got that on tape. And I said, Doddy's in the studio somewhere. I'd obviously rang him and said, would you do an interview with Ken? Yeah, I'd love to. And it's only be 2.5 minutes. And of course it ran 20 minutes, which was great. So,
and you just let it go?
Just let it go. And there were, funny enough, there was a crowd of nurses. There's no audience there, although there's all that laughter. It's the crew. And there were a lot of nurses being shown around the studio. So we had all those into this studio, which was no bigger than this room we're sitting in now. And of course it was hysterical. I mean, it just does that 20 minutes of, it was great. And mind you, it did come back, but I didn't think they were going to.
Yeah, well, that must have been a relationship you'd forged with them, and indeed with their manager, Brian Epstein. What are your memories of Brian?
Oh, I love Brian. Great, lovely guy.
Normal manager, normal type of manager, or?
Well, he wasn't really a manager, was he? That's the point. And obviously, once they became enormous, he was what I fear. He wanted to be an actor, didn't he? I'm sure he did. We used to go and have dinner or lunch in London, and he really wanted to be an actor, and I think it just got too much for him. I mean, he was doing some very bad deals, as they were concerned. But managers, don't know. I mean, it's a difficult thing. I've met so many managers, and you think, had the Beatles been with, say, Don Arden, because I know Don Arden wanted to get them, you know, what would have happened, you know, very difficult. But that was very sad when Brian went, of course. Yeah. But they did come back, but that was rather strange, because I think it was in '64, late '64, and I forget what the record was now, but I'd fixed a date with Brian to come back and do the plug. And we went out at 6:30. We had a dress rehearsal at 5:30, and then half an hour for a cup of tea before we went on the air. And I got the script. I wrote the script, and with clips of all the past appearances, little short bits of the Beatles, and with the script for Gay Byrne to read, you know, saying, you know, next Thursday, the Beatles are back. They've been in 4 or 5 times, and it was, you know, true. They love this program, and it's been great. And, you know, it's been wonderful to have them, and all this sort of thing. You know, they'll be on next Thursday. So on that day, that same day, we're going to transmit this promotion. About 5:30, I got this call from Brian's office, and it wasn't Brian. I can't remember who it was. And they said, these very words. They said, the Beatles, they can't do that show next week. They said, they're too big for local television now. I couldn't believe it. So, yeah, I said, oh. But anyway, I dashed down to the studio. I took the script I'd written down and crossed the last bit out and put, don't forget, lads, you meet the same people on the way up as you meet on the way down. And gave it to Gay. He said, I can't read this. I said, you're going to read it tonight. Within 15 minutes, I don't know how happened, I had a call from Brian. He's saying, oh, I don't know what's happened, but they are okay for that day. So Ray Coleman, in his book, Epstein biography, he reckons there was a saboteur in the office at the time and was trying to mess things up. But yeah, so it all worked out nicely. They came in, but then that was the last time we saw them, because they off to America and they conquered it.
Except you came back with one of the best music shows ever, the music of Lennon and McCartney, which was 65.
Yeah.
Rubber Soul period.
That's right.
And extraordinary idea behind it, and you know, stands out to this day up on YouTube.
Yeah.
Fantastic
a lot of it
show.
on YouTube.
What are your memories of that?
Well, during the 60s, like while I was producing Scene at 6:30, I made quite a few specials, you know, one with Little Richard, one with Jerry Lee Lewis and Gene Vincent, and there's all this on YouTube still. Who'd have believed that, you know? Blues and Gospel Train, that's had a recent radio programme on Radio 4. There's, you know, it's been some of those shows they're still sticking around. I would never have guessed. But when I did one of those specials with Burt Bacharach, I went to Paris to see Little Stevie Wonder. He was called Little Stevie. He was about 14 at the time. So some agent had recommended I go, follow up to the Little Richard, Jerry Lee Lewis. And the first half of the bill, there was this fantastic orchestra and black girl singer, Dionne Warwick, and Burt Bacharach. I thought, oh, this is fantastic. So I came away, having made up my mind and done a deal that I'd do the Bacharach show. So we did the music of Lennon, the Bacharach sound. Shortly afterwards, I thought, well, why not do this with Lennon McCartney? They've written enough stuff by now. I think Yesterday was the most recent of the songs, featuring all the artists or many of the artists that had recorded Lennon McCartney songs. And it's a good cast too, you know, Silla and Billy J, well, obviously all the Brian Epstein group, and but some extras like Peter Sellers. And
that was quite a coup. I mean, Peter Sellers at that point in time
Yeah, well, I mean, the record was great.
Singing Lennon and
Yeah.
McCartney, no less,
Yeah,
or reciting.
I mean, he was making these comedy records, wasn't he? And he was, who did, as Richard III, he did Hard Day's Night, and I thought, wonder, he was a mega star at that time, like a Hollywood star, enormous. But I got his phone number. I'd never met him before, and I rang him at home. I told him what I was doing, the music of Lennon McCartney. Would he like to do this Richard III thing? And he said, yes, dear boy. I said, I'll do that. He said, I'll do it on Tuesday. This was Thursday the night before. I said, well, we're not actually recording until another 6 weeks. The set wasn't designed, nothing was done. He said, well, unfortunately, I'm going off to Hollywood on Wednesday. He said, well, I'll do this on Tuesday. So I said, yes, okay. Booked Wallen Green, little studio at Wallen Green, and of course he turned up there and did it after about, at least 10 takes. He forgot the words. I mean, it's wonderful. And that clip's on YouTube. That's well worth watching. It has been a hard day's night, and I've been working like a dog. Whoa. Yeah.
You mentioned some of the names you were working with, some of the musical names. I mean, it's the names of the 60s, really, isn't it? The Beach Boys and the Rolling Stones. You got them on pretty early in their career.
I think they did their first telly for Scenic Theatre. I mean, I was not in the studio, I don't know where I was, when they came up. I booked them because I'd seen them working in Richmond. Yeah, in a club in Richmond. Great, and then they came out with a record, their first record, and I said, did a deal with up they came. And I wasn't in the studio when they arrived, and we had a executive producer, a really nice guy called Barry Heads. This was seen at 6:30, and he found me where I can't remember where I was. I wasn't in the studio, and he said, "There's this scruffy group turned up." He said, "One of them looks like the Neanderthal man." He said, "You brought people in like the Beatles and Freddie and the Dreamers and Jerry and the Pacemakers, all wearing nice natty suits." He said, and ties, and they look respectful. He said, "I'm not having those on my programme." I said, "Barry, believe me, they'll be big, they'll be popular." And I said, "I'll get straight back to the studio." So I went back, and of course I chatted to him and talked him round, but he didn't want them at all. No. And of course that was if I'd sent them packing, that was their first TV.
The dress code of Scene at 6:30.
Yeah. But everyone, of course, all the Liverpool groups are all wearing little collars, aren't they? And very smart.
Very smart indeed. Television changed as it developed.
Sorry?
Television, it changed. It continued to develop. I mean, when you got in, there were a lot of experimentation going on. You didn't really know. You'd turn the TV on in the evening. You didn't quite know what would come on next. Tonight, over on BBC with Donald Baverstock and Cliff Mitchell. You were in the hipper version with Scene at 6:30. And from that, you went to the wheel tappers and shunters.
Well,
how did that come about? Because there's this music side to you, and then there's this comedy side.
Yeah. It was about 1970, and one of the programme controllers said we could do with a good comedy show. And I thought, well, I've been round all the clubs for acts, for over the years. I mean, I knew most of the variety acts, and you got to work in men's clubs. And I brought 30 comedians in, I think. This working title was the comedians. And I brought 30 of these unknown comics in, got them all to, over 3 nights, and got them to do 10 minutes each. I took all this videotape away, and made up a pilot show. And that became the comedians, of course. And I mean, that was, whenever I do a talk or a lecture or something, people always introduce me. I say the creator of the comedians, So, and of course, that was funny really, because the first tape I stacked together, I had to show to my bosses. You know, I was a young producer. For their approval, and they were completely unknown comics, so I was it was liable.
They weren't. They hadn't been seen, had they, outside of the working men's clubs?
No,
Really,
not at all. You know, they thought, is this a network show? You know, it was a show. So we're sitting there in this little viewing room, and there's Sidney Bernstein and Cecil Bernstein, and Dennis Forster, Dennis Foreman. They're the bosses, me, and we're watching this. Playback of the pilot show, and Frank Carson comes on. He says, you know, it's a fast-moving show, one gag after another. Frank Carson comes on. He said, does that gag about his brother Sammy. Says, your brother Sammy has 2 wooden legs. He said, was in the building when it caught fire. He said the brigade was called out. He said, and they saved the building, but your brother Sammy was burnt to the ground. And he said the insurance company wouldn't pay out because they said he didn't have a leg to stand on. So when Bernard Manning comes on, I said, did you hear about the Jewish Santa Claus? Came down the chimney and said to the kids, do you want to buy some toys? And then Dougie Brown comes on, and he said, this chap goes into a pet shop and says, I want to buy a parrot. And the fellow behind the counter says, how much do you want to pay? And he said, about for £4. He said, well, take this one. And he said, well, can it talk? And the parrot says, a bloody sight better than you two. Well, I mean...
It's the way you tell them.
I'm sitting there, I'm thinking, Sidney and Cecil are both Jewish. Cecil had a very bad stammer, and Sir Dennis Foreman actually had a wooden leg. I couldn't believe it.
You got them all.
Well, they loved it. You couldn't do it these days, you know.
So they loved it, as indeed did the public.
Yeah, and that
Came the biggest thing.
It was enormous on telly.
And exploded back into the theatres.
Yeah, it was second only to Coronation Street on telly. After the first year, it was 1971, 1972, we did 6 months at London Palladium, summer season in Blackpool from June till October or something. There was an LP in the charts, there was several books.
And all of this from a moment where you just think,
I've seen those comics and they're good, you know. And that, you asked about the Wheel Tappers, I mean, that sort of... I had 2 shows, one at the Palladium, one at Blackpool.
How would you describe the Wheel Tappers? I'm married to an American, and the thought of trying to describe the Wheel Tappers and Shunters culture would be difficult.
I mean, we've got big stars to appear, you know, maybe sort of like Hal Keel and
but it's
Royal
the background that
I remember talking to Harold Keel, who I'd known. I'd interviewed him for cinema earlier on in the early 1970, and I knew him quite well. And he said, well, "John, what's this program about?" I said, "Well, you come out and do your song, but you might be interrupted by this ignorant chap with the bell saying the pies have come." And you might get a terrible introduction from Bernard Manning, you know, saying, like, hasn't had a hit in years or anything. So it was difficult to describe people who hadn't seen it, you know. But, I mean, the way it came about, the Wheel Tappers, was that the 2 comedian shows, I couldn't, obviously, played in Blackpool, couldn't put just 6 stand-up comics in each show and that's it. I had to devise little sequences, like there was a minstrel show, there was an old-time music hall, that sort of thing, and there was a Wheel Tappers and Shunters Club, where Colin Crompton was the chairman, and then the other 5 comics did funny acts. You know, there was a magician that dropped and juggler that dropped the balls and all that sort of thing. And I was watching it, we went to Yarmouth as well I was watching it in Yarmouth the year after. I thought this could possibly, if I revised it and changed a lot, it would be suitable for telly. So we built the Wheel Tappers and Shunters set in the studio. And off we went. I mean, I think the designer of that set should have got an award, because awards for design always go to costume drama, don't they? Never for, very rarely for light entertainment, but people thought it was a real club. We used to get phone calls saying, can we book a table for Saturday night? You know, of course it was done in the studio on a Wednesday night, as it happens, you know, but yeah, that was successful as well, yeah.
There was another series that I must mention, and that's Cinema with Michael Parkinson. Gave me a lifelong love of cinema and a lifelong knowledge, because it was incredibly informative as I was growing up about not just the movies of the day that were coming out, but looking back and giving you the history, which was for me fascinating. Can you tell us a little about that?
Yes,
your involvement.
In 1968, my daughter had a very bad accident at school. She was blinded by...
This is Mary.
Mary,
Yeah.
yeah. She was blinded by this explosion in the science laboratory, and that was in 1966, and she had treatment here, and then she had to go to Barcelona for the particular treatment that she needed, which unfortunately didn't work out eventually, but I spent the whole year, 1968, as her carer, really, in Barcelona. So when I came back, early 69, they asked me, would I produce cinema? Well, cinema was running, and it was about movies, obviously. And I thought, great, that Mike Parkinson was going to front it. He was a new presenter. And Mike and I, both like mad, keen movie buffs, you know, for years, both of us, and still are. It was a delight, particularly, as you say, looking back, when you interview people like Gene Kelly and, I don't know, Jack Nicholson, and we interviewed so many people. And Mike would normally do the interviews. I used to do a few for him. But then he left to go to BBC to start his great successful run on with his own chat show, and I took over and would interview over the shoulder. I wasn't in vision, you know, and then we'd show clips. I interviewed some. I mean, the most wonderful for me was Danny Kaye, of course. I used to. Actually, that particular time, I remember Danny Kaye, we did the interview in an office in Golden Square, which was our headquarters, Granada headquarters, and I was sitting in the office, and the phone rang. There's a Mr. Kaye in the foyer to see you. And it was half hour early, you know, and I said, oh, I'll send him up, you know, so came Mr. Kaye, and I was in awe, because I'd done his act, and you know. So he came in, and he said, I said, are you on your own? And he said, yeah, I get you. So I'd given those bastards at Warner Brothers a slip. I said, I said, and I walked out of the BBC last night. They were a lot of nutters there, you know. So, oh, great, this is going to be wonderful. Parkinson hadn't arrived, the film unit hadn't arrived. But of course I could sit with him, and I sat with him, and I knew every record he'd made, the whole of his life, you know, and he was suddenly warm to me, you know, really, it was lovely. And then when Parkinson arrived and said something, and Danny Kaye suddenly went into broad Yorkshire accent, and there was this wall again, you know. Parky hated it, so I thought that's not very nice. So incredible, but we got on great. And he invited me to visit when I was in California next, and never took it up. Of course, you don't do you?
Did you let him know that you'd started your career?
I talked to him, because I could talk to him for an hour, you know, because the film unit didn't arrive on time either.
You mentioned the word delight attached to cinema, and certainly I have to say that came out of the screen. So, you know, the fact that the two of you loved that show so much came over. Speaking of love, I'm looking around this room at these amazing pictures, and they're all your own work. Yes,
when I retired from Granada, I took up oil, but always wanted to paint, and I took up oil painting, took a bit of a course, and then started to paint portraits of, well, I started off in the normal way with normal, pictures of landscapes and all that sort of thing. But I thought I'd like to do some portraits of people I've worked with.
Had you been a painter all your life, or
No.
a new
I
talent?
I could always, I could draw a set or an idea for a set for a show. I'm always quite handy with a pencil. But I never actually painted before. No.
How do you approach, say, Paul McCartney? How do you approach? I'm going to do a picture of Paul. What comes into your head?
Well, complete just from photographs.
Right.
References.
Yeah.
Actually, funny, Paul McCartney was difficult. I mean, that's one. But all the photographs is a bit expressionless. It's not. There's not the thing that John Lennon's got, or Frank Carson, or Con Crompton, or all those. They've got something. I don't know. I found it a bit difficult. Yeah. Well, that's near enough.
That's interesting. So you find things out about them as you paint them?
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Very interesting. To finish off, television today. Do you watch it? What do you make of it?
The terrible thing is, I watch old movies. That's about...
Nothing terrible about that.
No, there's nothing... I really... it's great now that you just watch an old movie. I mean, I've got about 10 recorded that I want to see, old movies. And but I don't know, television, it's like going to a really posh restaurant and not... You've eaten it, you've done it, you've bought the t-shirt, you've done it, I don't know, so, I don't know, and people obviously ask the obvious questions about alternative comedy, or they called it alternative, I mean they're now, the old ones, when they called it alternative comedy, they're the old ones now, aren't they? But it's interesting, I think, to see that the programmes that I made during like the comedians, say, or the wheel tappers, or the music scene, programme controllers seem to lose, in the 70s, they seemed to lose interest in music, saying there was no, people didn't really want to watch music programmes anymore, and they would be put on late at night, they'd still be made, but they'd be put on late at night, whereas like the Little Richard, Jerry Lee Lewis and those sort of programmes, they went on at prime time in the 60s, But I did a series with Les Reed called International Pop Proms, and it was a 60-piece orchestra with Johnny Mathis. So there are lots of big artists appeared in it, and they relegated that to 10:30 slot, the programme controllers, but suddenly they said, there's an 8 o'clock slot. Mike Yarwood show can't do it or something, they can't make it. Now they put that one of the pop proms out at 8 o'clock. It was in the top 10 and number 2 in audience appreciation.
Yeah.
I mean,
Go figure.
Yeah. I mean, and to be honest, Granada, when in the 80s, late 80s, I left 87, you could see what was happening. It was splitting so many ways, and now independent producers, there's very little made in-house nowadays. It's independent producers who have to go with an idea for someone to commission it at the BBC or ITV or wherever, or Sky or whatever, have to commission it. And I'm quite sure if I went to the BBC or whoever, the ITV these days, saying, look, I've got this idea for a programme with about 10 unknown comics standing up and just on your bike.
On that note, can I say, Johnnie Hamp, it's been an absolute delight. And can I thank you for years of wonderful television and making the difference. Thank you so much. And the book is out there.
Yeah, available on Amazon.
It certainly beats working for a living.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. It was nice to see you.